Welcome to Rising from the Rubble, the podcast where we share real life stories of people who have faced life-changing events like burnout, redundancy, depression, and found a way to rise stronger than before. I'm your host, Maria Newman, and as a coach, I help individuals navigate life's toughest transitions. Whilst listening to this podcast, you'll hear inspiring stories and coaching insights that will empower you to reclaim your confidence, redefine your future, and rise from your own rubble. It's now time to sit back, relax, and enjoy listening to our episode. Hello, Penny, and thank you for joining me today.
I'm delighted, Maria. Thank you for having me.
You're most welcome. So, what makes your story meaningful to others?
I think what it shows is that without any qualifications, you can actually get there. It's not all about degrees. It's not all about letters after your name, although they're very nice to have. But if you have a goal, if you have a passion, you'll get there.
And who will benefit the most from hearing about your journey?
I think it's people who have hit a brick wall in their lives. They can't move on. They don't know how to move on. They're a little bit afraid, perhaps. They don't know what the future holds. Maybe they've been held back by a life event, not necessarily a work event. And they don't have the confidence and they think, I think I'm going to give up. Don't.
And what's the most important takeaway from your experience?
I think it's how important communication is and how you can actually build resilience, because that's what carries you through.
So, Penny, who are you and what's your story?
Well, I'm in senior years. Many people say, well, why haven't you retired? And I think my story is one of curiosity and discovery, because when I was 16, I was asked to write a tutorial on any subject, and I rather wanted to make a mark, be noticed, because I was a very shy person. I didn't really have an awful lot of confidence, and this was my way. I just loved writing. So the tutorial at college was all about the art of hot wire cutting, which is not something that you kind of write about every day. But my father was an engineer, and he used to take me into his factory and say, this is what it does, this is how it does it, now you do it. And the hot wire cutter is heated to 600 odd degrees centigrade, and in the hands of a 12-year-old. Not the brilliant health and safety story, but I loved it because it meant that I proved that I could do it and cut these polystyrene blocks, the polystyrene we all hate, and me especially, sticks to everything. And so I used this to get noticed, and my tutor wrote, have you thought of technical writing? And that was my light bulb moment. Now, college was only business studies and secretarial, because my parents always said, if you can do shorthanded typing, you'll always have a job. Yeah, okay, yes, but that's really not my goal. So it certainly wasn't after I'd written the tutorial. And all I wanted to do was to get into technical writing, become a journalist on a trade and technical publication. And it took ages, or at least it felt like ages, because I left college at 18 and I started in a music publishers called Boozy and Hawkes. very famous music publishers in Regent Street, London. And after 3 months, as the shorthand typist to the secretary of the education director, I was called into his office and said, Miss Hopkinson, they never called you by your first name then. I don't really think that this job suits you. Oh, really? All those pieces of paper that I snaffled away because I made so many mistakes, I couldn't read back my shorthand. Yes, so what? But actually, I was fired. I was told my talents probably, just take note, probably lay elsewhere. So I then went to another job and another, all pretty unsatisfactory, trying to get into publishing. And then finally, I answered an ad and I went to see Dr. Roy Owen, who was the editor of Hospital Equipment and Supplies and Health Service Hygiene and Equipment. And I wasn't a member of the National Union of Journalists, which is always a drawback because it was a union house and the union was very, very strong. And it was one of those situations where if you haven't had any experience, you can't be a member. Where do you get that experience? Not very easy. Anyway, Roy took a chance and made me an editorial assistant, which meant going through hundreds of press releases and making them, customizing them for the publications. Within 3 months, I became assistant editor. And then I moved to other technical publications within the same stable, Printing and Equipment. I then had my own column, which was rather nice. And I moved to health and safety. So I went to ROSPA, the Royal Society for Prevention of Accidents. I did a bit of freelancing in community care. And I worked freelance for Nursery World. And I was sent off to interview Hayley Mills when she had her first baby. Very scary. But she was wonderful. And that gave me my first world exclusive, which was all over the national dailies. And I thought, yes, this is really the life for me. I absolutely love what I do. And I subsequently became assistant editor of Electrical Contractor and Retailer. I would say that was not the girliest job. And then we had the 3-day week, the oil crisis. And because there wasn't a retail side, you couldn't, the sales of white and brown goods just dropped off the planet. I thought, well, what am I going to do? And I was then asked whether I would become editor of something called Media International, which was the European Journal for Planners of International Advertising. And I was suddenly propelled into a world of the world's top publishers and top advertising agencies, which was absolutely phenomenal. I was going to press dues and launches 3 times a week in the day, probably twice in the evenings. My social life was my work life. I made some wonderful, wonderful contacts and friends all over the world. And then I was headhunted by a PR company. Disaster. They fired me after 6 months because I didn't have what they called the media knowledge. Well, they hired me because they wanted my media knowledge. And they kept asking me, what's the national newspaper of Belgium or France or Germany? And I said, there is no national press. It's all regional. But they wouldn't take no for an answer, so they didn't keep me on for more than my probation, which was the best thing that could have happened, because I went freelance, used all my contacts in the publishing world, and started to there was an in-house publisher for cruise publications, for cruise lines and hotels, and he won the contract to do Gulf Air's In-Flight magazine, which meant I started to go to the Middle East. And that was a whole new, wonderful, wonderful world. And then I became a Middle East socio-economics correspondent and started to work for the International Herald Tribune, Wall Street Journal, Export Times, a whole raft of wonderful publications, interviewing merchants, ministers, and members of the ruling families.
So at that point in your career, you've obviously had this wonderful rise with a couple of like dips, still on an upward trajectory, and then you find yourself in a situation, a circumstance that is completely different to what we know here in the Western world. How did that feel? Because obviously you were definitely a woman in a man's world. What was that like?
It was interesting because as a trade and technical journalist on those publications I just mentioned, I was very often the only woman in the room. And I learned to handle it because people would come, the sales director would come up, bouncing up, what do you know about a marine engine? Well, actually, and what I would have done is go straight to the technical director and asked, tell me all about, what are the differences, or, why is it doing this, and this. So I would be able to answer from a position of strength. So I did my research before I got pounced on. But very often in the during the presentation and after questions, they would literally pinpoint me and say, well, Penny, what questions have you got? And I had to be ready to ask a question. So being in this male, which was really an ultra male environment, didn't worry me. But what did was building a reputation, because we had there was a very, very well-known book called The Oil Sheikhs by a Guardian journalist, and it revealed all the life behind the burqa, and it destroyed trust within families across the Gulf states, particularly Saudi, and they really did not take to women journalists. So I always said that I was an editor, and I started to build a trust. I started going out there in about 1976. And my favorite place of all was Oman. And in 1979, around April, I did my twice a year stint there. And there's a little expat community that always used to meet at the Gulf Hotel where I stayed. And we went to the local nightclubs and, did all sorts of really interesting, lovely things. But one of them was a German called Jürgen, who was a sound engineer, but he was teaching the sound engineers in Oman to learn their craft. And he'd finished his tour of duty and he wanted to take his car back. So what he did was he didn't want to ship it because he was worried it would get broken on the quayside. So what he did was he asked me whether I would drive with him from Oman to Stuttgart across the Saudi pipeline route. Well, I hated car journeys, absolutely loathed them. I was sick after about 20 miles. And I said yes. Typical me. So we did this, and that meant at the end of this trip, which was absolutely amazing, I was able, whenever somebody said to me, is this your first time in Oman, Bahrain, wherever, I could say no. Last year or a couple of years ago, I did this. And immediately they knew I was serious about the region, because nobody would be stupid enough to do this, because the Saudi pipeline route is about 1,200 miles long. It was broken road. Either side of the road, there were lorries that had shed their load of steel or whatever, because it was a paved road and the paving had broken up. So so it was a really, really, really difficult road to drive through. And also, I mean, I was with a blonde guy. I had red hair in those days, long red hair. And we were a pretty conspicuous duo across Saudi. But everybody treated us marvelously, absolutely wonderfully.
So you said your key to being successful was building the trust. How did you go about building trust?
I think it was by proving, first of all, that I was accurate in my reporting. And secondly, and this is really, really important, that anything I realized was shared in confidence, but they hadn't stated, I kept confidential. So I never revealed anything that was in the slightest bit untoward, even though there were all sorts of things that would go on round me.
And how did you manage to do that? Because I'm assuming that because you're in journalism, the newspapers would want to know, what's going on, what's the real story, what's underneath, how can we get people interested in reading our newspaper? How did you manage to keep what you were told that needed to remain confidential against the potential pressure?
I did that because I focused on socioeconomics, the development of the countries, because after the oil crisis, they had billions of petrodollars to build the countries up. And I was focused on 5-year plans. I mean, I remember reading the 5-year development plan for Dubai, where tourism was going to be the way to diversify away from an oil-based economy. And everybody thought I was completely nuts. Well, Dubai is one of the top destinations now. So I do feel a bit vindicated. And I watched this throughout the Gulf. And I watched how very carefully they planned everything, and how Oman decided it wasn't going to spoil anything, but be very strategic about the tourism development. And I just loved the unspoilt nature of some of those Gulf states.
And taking your experience of working in what is traditionally male industries, male dominated countries, there will be women who are listening to this who will be thinking, well, like for example, I used to work for Rolls-Royce, very male dominated in company. So I can empathize with what you're saying. You do have to just be confident in being yourself in order to get on, as opposed to be thinking, well, I'm a female and there's males around me, and using that narrative to keep you playing small. So, what advice would you give individuals who find themselves being a minority and sort of not knowing how to use their voice to be heard?
I think I'm going to upset a lot of people by saying that I'm an anti-feminist. The reason I'm an anti-feminist is because, very selfishly, I managed to rise above it. And I always believed that if you wanted something passionately enough and you honed and sharpened your craft, then that's more important and that's what gets you respected. So my advice is learn, learn, learn. Don't ever call yourself an expert. You can be a specialist, but always leave yourself that little bit of leeway to learn, not become that expert. Because when I was at school, I remember the last end of term speech we heard was from Lord Carrington, who used to be the Foreign Secretary. And he said, never become an expert or never call yourself an expert, because an expert is only a big drip under pressure.
Interesting.
Expert. So.
And I love what you're saying there about the fact that you have got to, over the years, develop your craft, know what you're talking about because you've done the work. Because if you've done the work, you've laid a solid foundation for wherever you go, as opposed to knowing a little bit here and there and not necessarily having developed your craft in such a way that you can prove you know what you're talking about.
Yes. I always say that it's not about letters after your name. It's about your life experience and how you put that life experience into practice. And the Middle East gave me my education. I learned so much about business and quite a little bit about finance as well. And to see those countries develop from virtually nothing to first world super states has been nothing short of amazing. I don't think there will be any country that will develop so quickly and so comprehensively.
And would it also be fair to say that your success was based on your ability to manage relationships and get on with people?
Definitely. I absolutely adore people. I'm such a curious person. Not intrusively curious, but I love finding out what makes them the person they've become.
And so, how did you go about building those relationships so that you knew how to get people on your side?
I think it's really by proving that I know what I'm talking about, I know what I'm writing about, I am honest, balanced, and straightforward. Or at least I like to think that I am. Journalism, as far as newspapers is concerned, has changed dramatically in all these years. You know, when I first started, it was all about describing everything in the first paragraph because nobody had time to read the rest. Now, they are in the same position, but the real story doesn't begin until the end. And that to me is wrong, because you only read half of it. So you don't get that balanced view. And this is really what newspapers trade on, is the sensational part without the context. Whereas magazine journalism is very different, particularly in the business context, because you have to be straightforward. You can't. There isn't a lot of room for interpretation. Facts are facts.
This is true. So we are coming to the end of our time together. I have two questions though before we leave. The first one being, what three things do you want people to take away from this conversation?
The first thing is, whatever your situation, however bad it might look, things are very seldom always bad. There is always a way to get out of it if you're surrounded by the people not only do you love and who love you, but who can support you through that bit of the journey.
That's so nice. And my final question to you is, people will be listening to this and be thinking, oh, I need to hear more about Penny. I want to be in her world. She sounds fascinating. Everybody, she is fascinating. How can others connect with you?
Well, LinkedIn is my best way to find me. So if you find Penny Hopkinson on LinkedIn, you can do that. Also, I've got my author website, which is www.pennyhopkinson.com. Very unoriginal. But I've got a couple of books adding to my business book. One is on business relationships called Relationships 2, in which I talk about how within marriage, two people who've got, or they're two entrepreneurs, and how they can build the relationship, not destroy it. And the other one is my current pet subject of AI. It's coming out next week. So I have a chapter with 34 global specialists in the AI Edge, which is civilization's next big disruption. So everyone from biotech to my little bit, you name it, it talks about what's happening and what the evolution is going to be.
Oh my word, that sounds fascinating, and obviously very in the now.
Very, yes. I was thrilled to be part of it.
And on that note, Penny, I'd like to say thank you for spending the time with me and being so open and honest.
It's been such a pleasure, Maria. It really has.
Thank you. And thank you, everybody, for watching and listening. Thank you for listening to Rising from the Rubble. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who needs to hear this. Also, remember to download your free life assessment. Just click the link in the description to get started. Take care, and remember, every setback is an opportunity for growth. I'll see you next time.